All right, hello, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your coq au vin versus fish pie. Hunger Games decides which was better. All right, we are moving on to our next session on 10 years of the Global Forum on Productivity. So before I start the session proper, we are going to have a video again from Matthias Cormann, Secretary General of the OECD. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, colleagues, friends all, a very warm welcome to the celebration of the 10th anniversary of the OECD's Global Forum on Productivity. Productivity growth remains the key driver of long-term increases in living standards across OECD economies. Yet since the early 2000s, productivity growth has slowed dramatically across advanced and emerging economies alike, from 2% in the early 2000s on average across OECD countries to less than 1% before the pandemic hit. Without stronger productivity growth, our capacity to deliver higher incomes, well-being and fiscal sustainability is at risk. And it was against this backdrop that the Global Forum on Productivity was launched in 2015. Over the past 10 years, the Forum has advanced international dialogue on promoting productivity growth. It has shaped the global agenda through cutting-edge research and by serving as a platform for discussion and the exchange of international best practices, convening policymakers, researchers, and civil society from across the globe. The new 10th anniversary book we are launching today collects the results of the Global Forum on Productivity's collaborative work for a better understanding of productivity. In several areas, the Forum has pushed the frontier of our knowledge, including on the role of competition in spurring business dynamism. Research of the Global Forum on Productivity has shown that the most productive firms keep pulling further away, while less productive firms fell further behind. Our research also identifies the slow spread of advanced technologies, often held back by barriers to entry and weak competition, as a key reason for this development. These findings help shape reforms to respond to these trends and reinvigorate productivity growth, including through greater investment in innovation, better diffusion across firms of knowledge and efficient technologies, and improvement in education and skills. Second, the influence of global value chains on productivity growth. The Forum has deepened our understanding of how countries and sectors are positioned in global production networks. Global Forum on Productivity research shows that firms with a central role in value chains achieve faster productivity growth. The strongest productivity gains from integration in value chains are observed among smaller firms and the least productive firms, showing that exposure to global business opportunities can encourage the catch-up of firms. Third, the key role of human capital and skills. OECD work undertaken for the Global Forum on Productivity shows that firms at the productivity frontier tend to employ twice as many skilled workers relative to the size of their workforce than low productivity firms. But skills shortages and skills mismatches remain a key challenge for firms and policymakers. Around 80% of firms across 36 countries report difficulties finding the people they need, creating a serious barrier to technology adoption and productivity growth. Firms that cannot find workers with the right skills often use their existing employees to perform tasks beyond their ability. Reducing such skills mismatches would lead to a more efficient allocation of workers across firms. And improving workforce composition through skills, better management, and greater gender equality and diversity perspectives could close productivity gaps by up to a third. Fourth, the role of pro-productivity institutions. To tackle slowing productivity growth, a number of OECD countries have set up strong, independent productivity boards to provide objective analysis and to help sustain the momentum for reform. Research of the Global Forum on Productivity has identified country practices that can help these institutions optimize their impact. Our work highlights the importance of ensuring the analytical independence of pro-productivity institutions and access to micro-level data on firms and workers to inform policies and interventions with objective data and evidence. In closing, the Global Forum on Productivity will continue to help governments design reforms that reignite productivity growth. A very warm thank you to all those who have contributed to the success of the forum over these years. This book is both a record of achievement and a reminder of the progress we must still make. Stronger productivity growth requires our best efforts. By supporting peer learning and providing a sound evidence base, the OECD will continue to be your partner in this. Thank you.
Some might say it's a bold choice to dim the lights and air a 10-minute video in the session after lunch. What I would say, it's a sign of the extreme confidence we have about how fascinating this next session is about to be. So I'm going to introduce our next chair on the session of 10 years of the Global Forum on Productivity, Peter Gall, Deputy Head of Division at the Economics Department of the OECD, and if our speakers could also join him on the stage as well. Thank you.
Welcome everybody back in the room after lunch, and it's great to have you all here on this anniversary session really about the GFP, the Global Forum on Productivity. It's been around for 10 years, it's a great achievement and very personal to me. I contributed to this for many years from the Secretariat side, and it's really nice to see this reaching this age. And let me also show the book that the Secretary General was talking about. Maybe there are a few more copies here that you can see, maybe the back of the room, and you can also find it on our website. It showcases really some of the most important work that the SG recapped and talked about. So the goal of the session really is to recap the achievements and the takeaway from the achievements of the GFP for countries' own analysis and policy advice, and also the future, how they see the future of the GFP and the related policy areas for their own countries. So before jumping into the two round of questions we're going to have, let me first introduce the panelists. First, we have Melissa Vega-Monga, who is economist from the Central Bank of Costa Rica. Then we have Stefan Profit, who is Deputy Director General of Economic Affairs and of the Economic Policy Department of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. I have next to me Dan Mawson, who's representing the host, the UK, a senior economist in the Department for Business and Trade in the UK. And we have Stephen Schwendt, who is Director General of Strategy, Research and Results, Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development in Canada. So let me jump to the first main topic of the session, which should be about recapping really how countries see the achievements of the GFP from the perspective of policy advice analysis in their own countries. Let me start perhaps with, a guest from far apart from Costa Rica. How do you see in your country, what were the main achievements of the GFP over the past 10 years that we have been operating? What were the main takeaways that your policy making could integrate? If you could reflect on that. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. First, I would like to thank you, the organizer committee, for inviting me to be part of this panel. I am very happy really to talk about two of my favorite topics, that is Costa Rica, and also productivity in the context of the GFP. When Costa Rica joined the OECD in 2021, we faced a fundamental question. How can a small and open economy like ours can understand and improve its productivity in a fast-changing world? And for us, I think that part of the answer came through the Global Forum of Productivity. So today, I would like to share how this initiative has transformed the way we think, we do research, and we understand productivity in Costa Rica. First, I have to say that the GFP can help us to move beyond average. Through microdata analysis and rigorous research, we began to understand productivity not only at the national or aggregate level, but also within regions, within sectors, and within economic activities. As someone with a strong background in academia and research, this part is very, very important to me. Microdata is not just a technical tool. It's a powerful way to understand how economies work and how we can improve them. And I think that the GFP had a lead role in making microdata a central tool for understanding productivity. Second, the GFP has helped us to shift from a fragmented view of productivity to a more connected one. By applying this holistic approach where we have research in innovation, human capital, green transition, trade, and industrial policies, we are gaining very important insights into what drives sustainable growth in a more complete and integrated way. Moreover, I think that this forum has helped us to see our strong points in a new light. What once felt like isolated advantages in Costa Rica, like our strong commitment to education or our strong trade integration, now form the foundation of a more cohesive strategy for sustainable growth. We are no longer just reacting to global trends. We are not just reading papers where Costa Rica was not included. We are now shaping our own path guided by evidence and focused on long-term impact. Third, the GFP has helped us to learn from other countries. Through conferences like this one and collaborative studies, Costa Rica has learned directly from more advanced economies, and I think that this is one of the parts that is priceless. Just to give an example, our participation in the GFP study on labor market shortages has given us critical insights to understand how to address gaps in a human capital-intensive economy like ours. Finally, the GFP also has helped us to stay ahead of the curve. Whether it is artificial intelligence, digital transformation of new technologies, this forum has provided fast evidence that allowed us to adapt quickly and align our research and policy programs with these new global developments. Just to close, I just want to emphasize again the two contributions that are most important for me as a researcher. First, the value that the GFP has placed on microdata as a central tool for understanding productivity. And second, the access to solid and robust analysis. In this sense, I think that the GFP has been some sort of a strategic partner, helping us to move from general ideas of general concepts about productivity to evidence-based thinking. In this case, in Costa Rica, I think that this has elevated the national debate, bringing technical arguments to the center of the conversation of productivity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa. May I ask Stefan to give their perspective from Germany about the GFP's achievements?
Well, thank you very much. First, what I like to say is that I'm very grateful to be one part of this journey, 10 years of GFP, a lot of great conferences, and I think one of the big strengths of the GFP over the last 10 years has been to bring together world-class academics together with excellent researchers from the OECD and policymakers from all member countries to actually discuss supply-side policies, industrial policies, productivity-enhancing policies altogether. And I can join Melissa and also the Secretary General in saying that this work that has been done, or actually the OECD has managed to reshape the way we look at productivity dynamics, not looking at aggregate policies only, but actually look beyond that and what in economic modeling, what we call micro foundations of macroeconomics, basically. Look at the distribution of firms, see how the dynamics are, how they're growing, and what productivity figures they have, actually using microdata to do this analysis. And well, it teaches actually that we have to target our policies towards this part of the distribution which is relevant, either to help laggard firms to catch up or leading firms to rise to the world, the peak or the leading firms of the world. And also to look at competition policies with respect of these frontier firms. So I think that's very important. And also what is important, and Professor van Ark said that we have to have a holistic view on productivity. And that's why the microdata analysis is not only on firm data, but it also extends to the linked employer-employee data that the OECD looked at and matched across countries, I think, which is really important. Also to extend the analysis to the workers' mobility, how workers are sorting into these frontier firms, and actually make this productivity gap even bigger. So I think that's the most important thing that the Global Forum has contributed. Also, I mean, sorry to say, as an outsider to the OECD, I think the Global Forum has lifted the cooperation of directorates that were part of the GFP, STI and ECHO, to another level. Tell me if I'm wrong. And that extends to the committees, actually, that work together with these directorates also, so the cooperation among colleagues from other countries, relying on best practices, learning on industrial policies. That has been very important. And the first thing, and the Secretary General mentioned that, I think institutionally, boosting or promoting the foundation of pro-productivity institutions, productivity boards, or even better, productivity institution or institutes is very important in anchoring pro-productivity policies within our countries, which is the case in the UK, as we heard today, which is the case in Germany, where we're struggling to get structural reforms on the ground. So I think this has been very important, and I think there's a very, very promising way forward for the forum as well.
Thank you very much, Stefan. This was really great to hear perspective you gave, very broad, not only for the analytical part that you covered, the importance of micro, which is an ongoing endeavor to, to take this approach on many areas of analysis, because microdata, official good quality microdata, is still not a given to access it easily. So this is great if the forum can play a role in this going forward. And thanks for your support in those efforts in the past. And I can really agree with you that indeed collaboration, not only in ministries, as you testified, it happened, but also within the OECD between branches and committees. The GFP really made it sure that there's an institutional link that continues to happen on a regular basis, and that's both for the benefit of our analysis and also for the benefit of the countries. Thank you very much for that. May I now turn to Dan to tell us about the UK perspective and how do you see the GFP's role in shaping your analysis and policy advice?
Thank you. So in my remarks, I sort of thought it worth starting off and thinking about how we've ended up here. I remember back into the early 2010s, there were the precursor conferences to the GFP. And it was really around then that we got together, we realized that actually there's a pretty serious problem starting to emerge here. Now, 10, 15 years on, we realize actually it's a really long and persistent problem. But a big thing from those conferences, which is why partly the GFP got founded, was we realized there was real value added, and as Stefan said, bringing the different committees of the OECD together, who all look at productivity, but also their wider research communities, who basically you wouldn't necessarily always encounter them in your sort of usual work. And I think that's my first point about where the value is. It's bringing those people together, and you're being exposed to ideas from other parts of the literature you wouldn't normally see. And that can range from the trivial. I was telling Jonathan Haskell earlier, I actually pinched one of the intros to his talks to the precursor GFPs as an example of why productivity matters, and I still use it today when I'm explaining it to non-economists. But there's also substantive policy. For example, I think it was the Lisbon GFP, there was a presentation on the impact of size-related thresholds, not in terms of thinking about admin burdens on business, but the impact on market dynamism and how you have these lost firms who could have grown, and that's the much larger impact on GDP. And I've literally used bits of that work recently when we were, I think, talking about that in the UK. The second thing it's done is the research program of the GFP has plugged genuine gaps. So you think about the work on teleworking, it wasn't just timely, it stood out as being got out early and said, this is the framework for thinking about the channels of impact for teleworking versus office working in terms of productivity, well-being, both, and the impacts on both the worker and the firm. And then having set that out, the GFP went out and did a survey and actually filled that evidence gap. And in a debate which is still a fair amount of airy-fairy hot air spoken by some people, and it stands out still as one of the more substantive contributions to that literature. The final thing I'd say is the GFP is a great community for drawing on expertise and practical advice. So in the UK, when we are setting up our Industrial Strategy Advisory Council, we reached out to members of the GFP to get their perspective as people who run productivity commissions, which is essentially what the ISAC is. And not unlike the ideal, we've already got the OECD's work on that, but the practicalities. How have you handled dealing with ministers and senior officials when you're about to tell them something they don't like? How have you managed to recruit really talented people, not just from the usual civil service routes, but also wider academia? And that was really helpful when we were starting to set up the ISAC and think about how you would do all this in practice. Thank you.
Thanks very much for this. You're bringing back interesting memories about mentioning the telework that we jumped on indeed during COVID times, and it was really nice because the GFP set out always, as they always do, a work program based on voting and everything, and then came the pandemic, and the countries all embraced that this shifting focus, and then we shifted gears and we prioritized this. We still kept the other research program as well, which was at that time the human side of productivity. So we went on with that, a little bit of stretching that out over more years, but indeed it was very timely that we could jump on telework thanks to the country's support. Thanks a lot. So may I now go to Canada's perspective and give the floor to Stephen to talk about the GFP's impact there. Go ahead.
Certainly, and thank you first to the organizers for having me on the panel, and congratulations to the OECD on 10 years of GFP. I'm going to risk repeating some of what my colleagues say, but I'll boil it down to a couple points. One is, and I think it was both in the Secretary General's response and what we heard this morning, is this forum creates a sustained focus on a pretty core economic concept. So over 10 years, we've heard of a lot of work that's gone into this, the research, the evidence base. We've also heard that the things evolve year over year. And so having a forum like this where the discourse, where the expert practitioners, where the policy people that are designing these come together and discuss the topics of the day is really important at an international level. I'll just double down on the whole research that's both evidence-based but also policy relevant, because many of us as living in that space, sometimes, as we've heard, evidence is great, but translating that into effective policy. And I think that's one of the other areas when you look at things like firm dynamism and heterogeneity, when you look at some of the post-COVID work, in terms of the dynamics, and as we heard today, change is the constant, and so really getting a handle on what those things are doing, whether it's frontier technologies and its impact on firm investment strategies, business models, and the like. And I think the last thing, maybe just to highlight, is a bit of that best practices, both in terms of sharing, but also the challenge that we all commonly sort of are grappling with. When it comes to things like policy experimentation. We heard today about the data is great, but sometimes it lags. Sometimes we don't have the data. And so the best practice can be where we might have used experimentation, where we might have taken a bit of risk and then share those again. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thanks very much. Very, very helpful. Let's do another round now, focusing more about the future. We heard a lot of good things about the past and what went well, and I'm sure you all have ideas of how it could go, even better. Perhaps adapting the topics, adapting the way we work together with the countries internally, and the type of data we are using, and perhaps also more broadly about the activities related to convening, such as these events. So, if you can share any thoughts about that, that would be great. Shall we start again with Melissa, please?
Yeah, thank you. Well, as I mentioned before, while the GFP has already made strong contributions, I think that there are still important challenges ahead, especially for countries like Costa Rica, where productivity actually has been growing in the past 10 years, more or less, but we still face important limitations and structural challenges. The first challenge that I would like to highlight is how we use microdata. We have made important progresses, but we are still struggling to measure things like intangible assets, digital outputs, and productivity in services. These topics, as you may know, are increasingly important in modern economies, and we need better tools to measure their value. I think that this is an area where the GFP could help us to move forward by providing methods and sharing best practices across countries. Second, another challenge is measure productivity in the public sector. And as you may know, public sector play a critical role that determines to some extent private sector growth, but we lack of consistent ways to assess the efficiency of the public sector. For countries like ours, I think that improving public sector productivity, or at least to have some measure, could help us to have a big impact in terms of growth in the long term. And I think that the GFP also can support this by promoting new frameworks and comparison analysis across countries. Third, we also need to better understand productivity in the informal sector. In Costa Rica, as in many developing countries, informal workers represent a large part of the labor market. I think that right now it is around 40%, so it's a lot. But let's be honest, it has to measure and often is left out of productivity discussions. So, but at least if we want a full picture of how Costa Rica economy is evolving, we need to include this sector as part of our analysis. And I think that GFP could help us to explore how to do it. Finally, and I think that everyone will agree here that we are facing growing global uncertainty. We have trade shocks, geopolitical risk, and economic volatility that affect investment, innovation, and productivity. And small economies like Costa Rica, we need strategies to respond very quickly to these challenges and to stay resilient. I think that here again, the GFP also can play a key role by providing timeline evidence and helping countries to align their research and policy responses based on these new global challenges. I see this like some sort of recipe. So there are at least 3 important ingredients that we need to include here to be successful. First, we need good data, high quality data. Second, we need solid analysis and to explore different methodologies to try to answer part of these questions. And third, we need also a strong international collaboration. As I mentioned before, the GFP already has helped us to move forward from general ideas and general concepts about productivity to a more evidence-based thinking. But now it can help us, I think, to go deeper to turning these complex problems into practical solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. That was a very rich set of advice. We really appreciate it. When you mentioned data issues, and in particular the informality sector, it reminded me of the challenges you have from a very geographically different group. So informality may be a bigger issue in Latin American countries than elsewhere. So this is going to be a challenge to map the different focus of the countries. But some of the other measurement challenges are very uniform, and public sector has been often mentioned by many core OECD countries as well as a recurring issue. So that may be something to put on the program at some point. Although it's probably the most difficult areas, and that's why it has been generally less preferred than other topics that were more topical. So this was really helpful and interesting. Thank you so much for that. Stefan, what is your view about the future of the GFP and these issues?
Well, first, let me mention, I had, as my colleagues here on the podium, had a chance to look at this great book that has been published and distributed now. And there's also, at the final pages, there's a number of proposals and ideas on future projects. And so all of them are excellent and could be mentioned, but I try to go beyond a little bit and maybe make a few points from the view of the country where I come from, which is an export-oriented industrial country with an aging population. And naturally, one topic that has been touched by the GFP in the past, but I think would deserve more attention, is the division of the view. I mean, we look at the world as economists from the view of governments, countries, but then we have the world of enterprises, multinational enterprises, who are responsible to their shareholders, and a lot of them are not anchored in single countries anymore, or maybe just for diplomatic reasons sometimes. So to understand more or better the role of multinational enterprises in a world of reshaping geoeconomic forces and dynamics and economic security considerations, I think would be important to find the right policy implications of this. I think that would be one point that I'd like to make. The second point is naturally aging societies. How can we actually extend capacities to be able to harvest the productivity potential that we find in technologies and other fields? One point that I think, I mean, in very or many analysis of the OECD and also academic research, the analysis ends with saying, well, you know, we have the employment protection is too strong in one country. And I think actually what we need is a deeper dive into labor market institutions, really looking into success models in other countries, best practices, as we did sometime in the 90s, where we looked at the Netherlands, to Scandinavia, to the UK, and we need to get a deeper insights how we have to reshape our labor market institutions, given the revolutions that we'll see through AI and technology that will reshape the way we work in our economies. And I think that is very important. A third point that was mentioned by Melissa again was the public sector. I think we discussed that in the Global Forum several times, whether we should pick up on the issue of productivity of the public sector, and we always shied away because say the data is not so good. I mean, there's a lot of indicators, but it's really a tough measurement issue that you face. But on the other hand, I think it's important to have a broader view on, it's not only on efficiency, I think it's on the role of the state, actually. The government, the state has in our economies, and that would deserve a deeper look from my view.
Thank you very much. So that's a double down on the public sector topic, which has been a difficult one. You mentioned the M&E focus, which is a little bit related to measurement, better measuring productivity and the boundaries of firms and things like that. So that's going to be also a challenging topic, I guess, from a measurement point of view to track down these M&E activities. We have these nice, often used accounting firm level data set, Orbis, which has some ownership information, and our colleagues in STA have done great work about mapping out these ownership structures. So maybe that could be picked up on later on. Aging is something we really, have been working on in the core committees as well, especially in ECHO. And it's indeed there's a lot of interest in linking this with productivity. We saw it in the previous session as well, that there are many channels through which aging can impact productivity negatively or positively. They operate at different levels, at the micro level, at the macro level. The channels might work out differently. And this is a very common challenge, in fact, across all the OECD. I mean, Europe is aging a bit faster than other parts, but it's a predictable trend, as Bart was saying. It's a predictable trend that is going to get more difficult. And it's also related with the public sector issue, because this comes with expenditures that are baked in, sort of, with the aging society. So that's a nice direction, I think, for future work. Thank you. Dan, how do you see this question?
So I think a key first point is the pervasiveness of the productivity slowdown across OECD countries suggests this is A, a common problem, and B, is not going away. But as both Bart and Diane alluded to earlier, there is now a creeping sense that some of our policy toolkits, which seemed to work pretty well in the past, don't quite work so well for the modern world. Whether it's competition policy, the incentives we use to drive investment, they're not quite working as we'd hope. And that's not like unique to one country, it appears to apply to quite a lot of countries. So I think there's something around how do we tweak our policy toolkits to be more pro-productivity in the new world we're in. Related to that, as speakers have already mentioned, there's a lot of trends, such as the twin transitions, demographic change, all of which impact on productivity in different ways. And I have no doubt that there are going to arise from that combination of factors issues which don't fit neatly in any one sort of area. And the GFP is well placed to just step in and plug the gap, because it has the scope and focus to say that affects productivity. We don't just do micro or macro, we cover the whole pitch. I think another key point is around the pushing forward the kind of microdata and research agenda, because we were talking about this last night, when you go to a committee meeting or a GFP and someone puts up great linked data and you think we don't have that yet, there's a sort of slight impetus to try and improve your own data so you're not being left out of all of these great projects. But I think my third point is around we need to better understand how businesses and other organizations make decisions to invest, train, innovate, and unpick that kind of micro foundation, then track it back up to the macro consequences to really understand how we redesign our policy toolkit to be more effective.
Thank you so much. Very interesting point that you mentioned last, because it resonates closely with Bart's point on organizational capital as a main driver of growth going forward. It's obviously difficult to estimate the exact contribution of that, but also even more difficult to disentangle how it's being put in place and what are the barriers to successful implementations of good organizational capital conducive to productivity, and which are the factors that hold it back. So that again requires us to have a very detailed micro look, even perhaps using alternative data sources than what we've been used to, because they fail to measure these decision-making related issues and detailed activities of the firms. I think we have great examples to move there and measure things that we haven't done in the past, at least when it comes to survey-based approaches. So we can launch surveys that are focusing on a few firms, try to be more representative, and try to scale those up in case we don't find already available data sets. And the GFP has done these with labor shortages more recently, and then previously with telework. So I think there can be good examples to build on in these areas as well. Stephen, how do you take this question, please?
Well, thanks very much. I'll take a slightly different take on this. I want to put it in the context of industrial policy. and specifically the priorities of the new government in Canada. They've outlined 7 missions, and I listened with interest to colleagues this morning who have had a year doing an industrial policy. So in terms of some of the things I'll highlight here is we now have a Minister of Artificial Intelligence and Digital Transformation. And so the emphasis on the real impact of AI adoption, AI deployment within firms and otherwise is going to be really huge. And so that's one area that I think we would certainly benefit and want to contribute to in terms of pushing the envelope there. I'll throw my voice to others that when it comes to skills matching, including management and the rest, on the margins of the transitions, that's also something that's going to be very important to us. One of the priorities of the government is actually to reduce internal trade barriers between provinces and territories within Canada. Like others, we have labor shortages and skill shortages, but it's a fragmented area, so certainly in that piece. And then finally, I agree with my colleagues wholeheartedly. Public sector productivity is an area that we really need to move on as a collective. If you look at not only the spend, the absolute spend in terms of government dollars, but actually in Canada's case, for example, the federal government is the largest employer in the country. And when you look at those type of metrics, that's really an important area for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Point well taken. It's been mentioned and pointed out several times. I'm very glad you raised AI because that would have been my next question. We talked about future topics, and as we have seen in the previous panel, one of the main sources of productivity growth going forward is, as many people believe, it's going to be digital, especially AI. And I wonder how you see the role of GFP in this field. I mean, Stephen, you just mentioned that you would like to assign an important role of GFP to this. But given that there is other work in the House looking at AI, both in STI and in ECHO, I wonder if there can be some fruitful way to collaborate between the two sets of ministries and communities on the topic of AI. Do we have any views on that? Perhaps, I don't know, maybe I can start with Stefan.
Well, I think the work that has been done in the Global Forum, and I think I have to extend that also to the Secretariat, the OECD altogether, I think has been excellent and groundbreaking, and also pulling together academic experts to do that, to look at the competitiveness dynamics of firms. I mean, to see that actually the companies who have been ahead of the movement 12 months ago, or 2 years maybe, some of them are gone already. So the markets are really contestable, obviously. But on the other hand, we don't know whether this will be sustained or whether we'll see that companies will join together and actually stabilize their market position, and also the question of sharing data, sharing the sources, being open to companies, startups. So I think that's very important questions, and I think the OECD have been among the first to collect data on this, even though it's almost real-time data, you have to say. So I think that was really helpful, and I didn't mention the issue because it's so obvious and it's in the book. And it's clear that this topic will shape our discussions on economic policy for the next 10, 20 years, I guess.
Thank you, Stefan. This is very, very helpful. Then, given that the UK is also contributing to AI development, it has very important companies here. How do you see the role of AI in productivity, and how do you think GFP could or should enter this area?
So I'd echo Stefan's point about the really great work the OECD has done on this, not only pushing out the boundary of our knowledge of AI, but also employing quite a lot of interesting techniques. So, for example, there's a paper which essentially merged job data with patent data with web scrape data from firms to look at the characteristics of AI producers versus adopters through multiple lenses, because one of the problems with emerging technologies is you can't survey about them because you can only survey about things you know exist. And in the AI landscape, the actual terminology changes so fast, but by the time you've got a survey out, your question's already all wrong anyway. And I think where the OECD has really added value, and the GFP, I think, should home in on, is the real value of AI is not in the making of it, it's in the adoption of it. And that's the really hard bit. So we're in the J-curve. we'd have no idea how long that J-curve is going to be, but it also, you need to think about, well, where is it going to be adopted? Where is the actual real value? There's a lot of hype about AI, about it can replace lots of tasks, lots of jobs, but actually when you get down to it, there's not always a coherent view about, well, what happens if you do have a transformational scenario? What does that really mean? People start talking about lots of job losses, and in a recent sort of seminar, I had to point out that there's lots of job losses. No one will be buying these products because they won't have any jobs. So you need to cover it from a macro and micro perspective and think about, well, how will this really play out? And what moves you to a successful, high productivity, high adoption scenario as opposed to something else?
Oh, that's really great. It gives a nice pitch to AI as a new emerging technology, which has to be looked at both on a micro and a macro side to really, to look at the implications. Melissa, do you have a view on this, perhaps the relation of AI and the work we could be doing?
Yeah, I think that maybe in Costa Rica we are one step behind other countries. So we need first try to understand how to measure artificial intelligence, to later try to understand how it's going to impact the economy. So I think that the main contribution that I see from the GFP is to start the discussion of how to measure artificial intelligence. I don't know if this is a problem that is common across countries, but sometimes it's very difficult to get this information from firms. So I think that, yeah, I just focus on the first step, that is how to get good measure of how firms and companies are implementing artificial intelligence, to then start to thinking about how this is going to impact our economy.
Thanks very much. I think we are reaching the end of the panel, and I just want to really go back to some of the issues that came up several times and put on the table as a plea of going forward. So you all appreciated the macro focus that the GFP has initiated and keeps doing. You would like to expand the area of research to public sector and to more measurement, keep up the measurement challenges related to multinationals or public sector or new technologies such as AI. But also, of course, paying attention to that at the end we all want to give more precise, more relevant policy advice. So that's going to be a nice challenge going forward. I think I will close with this, and thank you very much to all of you for contributing to the panel. Thank you to all of you for listening.
Thank you. We'll just give it a minute for this round of panelists to leave and the next round of panelists to arrive. So thank you so much for that. Though I did notice that Dan Mawson admitted to academic plagiarism in that session, and I think Jonathan Haskell does have the right to sue him. I won't support you when you go to trial. Thank you so much. We're now going to move into our next session on a topic that's been mentioned many times today, which is market dynamism. And can I please introduce our chair, the Deputy Director for Export and Spatial Analysis in the UK Department for Business and Trade, Zebedee Nati. And if the rest of the panelists could also join him on the stage, please, and take your seats. Thank you.
It's extremely bright here with my glasses, apologies. Yes, my name is Zebedee Nati. I lead the Exports and Spatial Analysis team, and it's really a great opportunity to be here and also for the panel. Apologies in advance if I pronounce your names incorrectly. I'm British, so that's our excuse. This session will be on industrial policies and market dynamism. We know that there's been weakening market dynamism across developed nations since 2008, and this is a key concern for many policymakers and also those on the panel. And over the sort of next hour or so, a little bit more, we'll be covering a number of different areas, and some of these include how can industrial policy be pro-competition and competition be pro-growth? So going backwards and forwards there. And what challenges are there for coordinating industrial strategy, competition, and regulatory policy to support market dynamism and growth? And finally, how can policymakers balance competition with industrial policy goals, and broader economic growth objectives? We have an esteemed panel here. We will kick off initially with a scene setting by Tommaso Dusso, who's the head of department at DRW Berlin and the chairman of German Monopolies Commission. Then we'll have three shorter presentations, one from Dorothy Rouzet, hopefully, Chief Economist at the French Treasury, and thank you for presenting in English, because I know you can do both, but French maybe is your first language. Paolo Quechia, who's also Director of Research and Analysis at the Ministry of Industry and Made in Italy as well. And finally, last but not least, Luc Rahil, economist at the Department of Finance Ireland. We'll leave all the questions to the end, like we've had in the other sessions as well, where we'll take questions from the floor as well as online. So, Tommaso, feel free.
I don't see anybody. I just see the lights. So it's a great pleasure to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. I will set up the scene by talking about competition, competitiveness, their relationship, and maybe saying something about a new approach that we could take for policy that is centered on competition, not just as a goal, but also as a mechanism. I will start with a few facts. So I cannot start talking about competitiveness without mentioning the Draghi report. That is what kicked off many discussions in Europe in the last year. And Mario Draghi mentioned we have this existential challenge in Europe. Competitiveness is not growing, and here I can echo what the previous panel was saying. When I talk about competitiveness, the first thing I think about as an economist is productivity growth. So productivity growth in Europe is growing much less than the US after many decades where there was a catch-up. We see also that the GDP growth in Europe is not as developing as much as in the US, but now also is not developing as much as China. And as the first panel today was mentioning, so probably the big challenge that Europe is faced is that we have an investment and innovation gap. And this investment gap is particularly focused or concentrated in those technologies and sectors that are key to produce the productivity growth in new technologies, in digital technologies. And a part of this innovation and investment gap is due to the fact that many firms, those firms that should invest and should bring this new technology to the market, have a difficult access to capital. So this is now, I think, millions of panels have discussed about this. This is the state of competitiveness in Europe. And the next piece of evidence I want to bring is the state of competition in Europe, because the section today is talking about market dynamism and competition. So I will mention this study that was published also last summer by DG Competition. It's called Protecting Competition in a Changing War, which is putting together three different studies. One that was done by the OECD, led by the group around Chiara Criscuolo, another one done by an international consortium, and I was an economic advisor of that, and a third stream coming from DG Comps itself. So the bottom line of the study was to try to understand how competition is evolving in Europe. And of course, to measure competition is very difficult, so the approach was to build up a puzzle. So we talked about concentration today already. So many of the things I will say now are essentially repeating what Jan Coyle said this morning. So the work of the OECD shows that, for instance, that concentration in Europe is increasing, maybe a bit less than in the US, but it's increasing. And it's increasing especially in those markets that tend to be smaller, so markets or industries that operate at the domestic level more than at international level. What the broader study also shows is that this is not just something that we observe in industry, but we observe also in market within industries. We observe the same patterns. And of course, we discussed before, so this micro-macro approach, so if you go and look inside the different industry, you see a lot of heterogeneity, but this trend is very, very present. Now, there are many reasons why concentration is increasing, and Phyllis mentioned today increasing concentration is not per se bad. It can be that increasing concentration is just signaling that some firms are becoming more efficient, they are bringing new technologies, and they are gaining market shares. And indeed, the evidence brought by this study shows that the rise of intangibles we talk about today is a driver of increasing concentration. On the other hand, we also see that increasing barriers to entry, mergers and acquisition, and also the enforcement of merger policy can be seen also as drivers of this. Now, again, so increasing concentration is not bad per se, so what the study is also trying to do is to look whether concentration as a measure of competition and market outcomes are related. It's very difficult, we know as industrial economists, to measure this causal link, so we did it for some specific industries. And I bring you the example of mobile telecommunications. Here we had good data and a good, as we call it, identification strategy to show that there is a causal relationship between market structure and outcome. So we see that actually in the mobile telecommunication industry, an increase in competition, if you want. So one additional mobile network operator is associated with 7% lower prices on average, right? So, but we also see that it's associated with more investment, contrary to some of the arguments that are brought in the public discussion. So in this specific example, we see that concentration is detrimental. Now, another piece of evidence that was also mentioned is the increase in markups. The wonderful work of the OECD was showing that this increase in markup is that we observe worldwide. It started with a study by De Luca and Eckhout for the US, but it's something that we observe also in Europe. And again, we see that this increase is maybe not as pronounced as in the US, but is still substantial, and especially so at the top of the distribution. And again, with a lot of heterogeneity and an increase especially in digital intensive industry and in services. This is something that is also reflected in the business dynamism. So this increase in markups and in productivity, but also in profits, is something that we see at the top of the distribution. So we see that the gap between the leaders and the followers is increasing. Again, so this might not be problematic, but it can become problematic if the incumbent in the market cannot be challenged anymore. And indeed, we see that together with this increase of this gap in, between frontier and non-frontier firms, we see also a decrease in market dynamism, less entry and less exit. So we will talk a bit more about less entry, but I want also to stress that exit is also a very important element for competition. And that is also something where industrial policy should not do the wrong thing to keep inefficient firms in the market, which is something that in some European countries seems to be the case. So now we see that in Europe competitiveness is decreasing, competition is also decreasing. So what is the relation between the two? And as economists, we know that competition is a driver of competitiveness. And indeed, we try to provide evidence in these studies about that. So we provide different kind of evidence. For instance, we use a macroeconomic model that is calibrated based on the parameters that we estimate, especially the markups, and do some simulation exercise. So for instance, in a backward simulation, we show that the increase in markups that we observed in the previous pictures since the 2000 might have been reducing European GDP by 5 to 7%, which is substantial. In forward-looking scenarios, we show that limiting the market power, actually limiting the increase in markups at the top of the distribution or implementing pro-competitive reforms, each would have a positive impact on GDP growth by 2 and 4%. So this is, of course, a model, and models are models. They are not reality. You have to feed with data, but gives an idea of the relationship at the macroeconomic level. But to complete the puzzle, we also ask firms. We did a survey with almost 400 firms active in sectors that are exporting throughout Europe, asking them how important is competition, domestic competition for you. And almost 80% of these firms respond that competition was crucial for their innovation, for their investment, for the quality of their product, and for increasing efficiency. So firms themselves understand that the process of competition is a stimulus. And these mimics results that we had from previous studies where we showed that actually competition policy, good competition policy, both in terms of institution and enforcement, is not only positive related, but it's causally implying increasing TFP and labor productivity growth. So now, what are the policy implications? So the policy implication is that, and here I will mostly focus on Europe, but some of the things I will say are more general, is that we need a new approach. The world has been changing. We are facing two huge transformations. The geopolitics, at least since January, has substantially changed, and we have to react to that. But now we have really to think what is the right approach, and what I will suggest is this competition-oriented policy approach that has competition both as a goal but also as a method. And I will try to be more specific. So the first thing that I think is absolutely crucial for Europe, and is something that both Mario Draghi and Nicoletta mentioned, is that we can do something that others cannot do, which is complete the single market. That is probably the best industrial policy that Europe can do at this time. Why? Well, first of all, because completing the single market by reducing entry barriers increase the market size, increases the incentive for firms to invest and innovate. By reducing entry barriers across country that account to, since they are like a tariff of across European countries, also increase competition. So if firms can enter other national markets, they increase competition in that market. In reducing regulatory disparities across country by harmonizing regulation also reduce regulatory risk. We discussed today how important risk is for investment, and that is something that is in the hands of European countries to reduce. And as I mentioned, completing the single market, which also means completing the capital market and the banking unions, is crucial for firms, especially those firms that are leading innovation and disrupting technology, which is startups and SME, to help them to have access to capital and do the investment that they are not doing at this moment. Of course, we need to improve competition policy. So here, my view is very clear. I don't think that we need to enforce competition policy less. I think there is no evidence whatsoever that merger control was stopping investment in Europe. On the contrary, we should be much tougher when enforcing merger control. But we have to do it much better. And that is what we need to change. Fortunately, DG Competition opened a consultation on the merger guidelines where hopefully ideas like the role of dynamics, of innovations, and potential competition will be embedded much better in the framework that we use until now. Competition policy is not just merger control, it's also antitrust, but in Europe it's also state aid control, and there is no secret that we have to become more effective and much more quicker. And we have to coordinate the new tools that we have developed in the past decades, like new regulation, like the DMA, DSA, or the foreign subsidy regulation, with our new tools to regulate competition in some markets and competition in international markets with the existing tools. Last but not least, we need to rethink how we do industrial policy. It was mentioned several times. We have been doing industrial policy all the time. Between 2019 and 2023, Europe spent 1.3 trillion in state aid. I mean, these are huge sum of money, and state aid is only one part of industrial policy, so we have to do it better. These are the four principles I want to mention before ending. First of all, this industrial policy should be competition-oriented. What I mean two things. The first thing is that we should use the logic of competition also for designing the policy. That is something that Diane also mentioned today. So we have to use open and competitive procedures to allocate resources to firms. We have to better use procurement rules as a tool of industrial policy. We have to be very careful when we allocated resources not to favor the incumbents. It was a question from the audience today. We should protect small or give a chance to small and medium enterprises that are the backbone of the European economy to get access to these resources. We should also think about the implication of industrial policy on competition. That is something we know from state aid control. There is this concept of the balancing test. Industrial policy is there to solve a market failure, and then one should balance how good the tool that we choose is to solve that particular market failure with the potential distortion that it causes. So here we can think about open access obligation, conditions that we attach to the policy so that competition is not distorted. It should be much more strategic, also a point that Diane was mentioning. So we cannot do everything. So we should focus on things that are really important. It's not only horizontal policy, but it's also vertical policy, infrastructure policy. And if we do vertical policy, we should think about those technologies that are key for many value chains, at the beginning of many value chains, like semiconductors, batteries, and so on. It should be European. Mario Draghi said it very clearly. We cannot continue to do national industrial policy. We should coordinate and do it together because the challenges that we are facing are general. And the last point that everybody mentioned, but I still think that is not something that is embedded in the policy how we do it today, is policy should be evidence-based. It should be based on data. It should be based on evaluation and experimentation. Big tech firms experiment millions of times every minute. So policymakers should also start experimenting, probably not at that pace, but use instruments like sandboxes or sunset clauses. And I stop here, sorry.
Thank you, very much appreciated. Dorothy, if you can go to the stand and present as well, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me delve a bit more into a few more facts about where we stand in France and in Europe, and then I'll talk about the French experience with trying to reconcile industrial and competition policy. Maybe the starting point, I think, by this stage of the day, we've already said it, but is when we talk about market dynamism seen from Europe, and we see a more static industrial structure than in the US in particular, less emerging firms that are capable of disrupting sectors, of bringing new innovation, of bringing new sort of productivity engines. And this typically we can see in the average age of firms in France or in Europe. So if we look, for instance, at the average weighted age of the top 150 firms, so that's the data dates back from 2015, but it hasn't really changed, I guess. In France, it was 132 years old. In the US, 91 years old. And if we sort of zoom in to the real largest firms, so taking the 10 biggest listed firms in Europe, that's IMF data. On average, they were created in 1911. In the US, on average, they were created in 1985. So we see there is quite a lot of difference in the sort of churning rate. And that can be linked, that lack of dynamism can be linked to relatively lower spending on innovation, especially private spending on innovation. In France, total spending on R&D is a bit over 2% of GDP. So we have European objective of 3%. We're not getting there, and the deficiency is really in the private investment. Both of these things have a sectoral dimension because we are more specialized in more mature industries. These are industries with less churning of firms, and also industries that spend relatively less on innovation. This is something that I think in this session we're going to say Draghi report pretty much every time we talk about Europe. This is something that emerges very clearly from the Draghi report as well, is the sectoral nature of both weak productivity and weak market dynamism, and especially the sort of missed opportunity of the digital sector. What we see here on the left-hand side is an index of positioning for the EU, the US, and China. The EU is in blue, the US in red, and China in gray, in a range of complex technologies. The further up, the more complex technology it is. And we see that for the sort of technologies at the top, the EU is really lagging, and especially in artificial intelligence, in cybersecurity, Internet of Things. Whereas in the industries at the bottom, which tend to be more green technologies, there is a bit more of a comparative advantage. If we look at the productivity side, on the right-hand side, this is data on France from a paper by Simon Buniel and co-authors. What this tells you is the three sectors in red, which are all digital sectors, account for about 2/3 of the difference in labor productivity growth between France and the US over the last 20 years. So this is really where we have a problem, and we have this problem of both innovation and market dynamism. So starting from that, and how do we get to industrial policies from there? I mean, this is kind of the starting point from where we say, well, there is a deficit in innovation. We know there are market failures in innovation investments. So what is the role for both horizontal and vertical industrial policies there to try to accompany the evolution of our industrial structure towards a set of goals that is diverse between competitiveness, but also decarbonation, resilience. I mean, I guess traditionally, at least for a period that went from the 1980s to 2010s, more or less, the consensus was you should focus on horizontal industrial policies. They are not distortive because they will support all businesses in a sector. They ensure a level playing field, and then you can have horizontal investment with horizontal incentives, which we do, for instance, with R&D tax credits in France. But then once you say that, I mean, first, well, vertical policies are potentially distortive, but anyway, everyone is doing it, so we might as well think about how to do it well. I think this has already come up in this day. And there is also a case for them because there are market failures that are linked to these different goals that I talked about, innovation, decarbonation, or resilience, that lead to underinvestment. There is also potential conflict between these goals, which we have to think about it. I mean, in terms of principles, I think by now we have kind of a corpus of work about, and also looking back at past experience. I mean, we've done some deep dive into 60 years of industrial policies in 8 advanced countries, tried to see what worked, what didn't work. I guess, I mean, we end up with general principles about how it must preserve preserve competition to be efficient. I think this has already been said in part by Thomas or by Diane this morning. I mean, first we want to remedy market failures rather than picking winners. Target specific sectors, not specific firms. Be careful about not supporting incumbents disproportionately, but rather supporting new entrants. Being technology neutral, especially when it comes to innovation, and trying to encourage innovation at early stages, and having competitive processes in order to avoid capture by the largest firms. Now, once I say this, of course, the question is how to do this in practice, and there it gets a bit harder. So we've tried, and I'm going to try to talk about this experience with the main tool of vertical industrial policy in France, which is the France 2030, France 2030 plan, which was launched in 2021 with a budget of 54 billion over a number of years. The idea is really to try to rather support early stages, to support innovation, but also early stages of industrialization in a limited number of key strategic sectors that are key for both, I mean, on the digital, on green industries, strategic industries, which were chosen after a sort of market study phase with sectoral experts as well. There is a part of it which is dedicated to horizontal policies, especially to financing innovation ecosystems, which we also know to be important. And then on the real vertical side, I mean, we try to think in the design phase to really think hard about the governance and about the evaluation from the get-go. So the plan focuses on a number of targeted sectors, which was fairly low initially, which I have to say has a bit grown over time. So there again, a bit difficult sometimes in practice. On technological challenges, we try to be technology neutral and specify really objectives rather than specific technologies. I mean, for instance, you want to, work towards a low carbon plane. It might be a hydrogen plane because that's what we think at the moment, but there might be someone coming up with a better technology, and if so, great. Something, I'll talk about it again in a second. So we really were careful about, at least in the design phase, about thinking how can we not support incumbents, which tends to be sort of natural drift if you have processes, even competitive calls for projects. Usually the firms that knock at the door first are the bigger ones. So we had a 50% target of all funds for emerging players and competitive calls for projects, which, as I say, were designed after consulting industry experts. Then, I mean, again, it's a bit, I would say it's proven harder in the implementation phase and in the principles on 2 main dimensions. One is these emerging players. It's really hard to foster even, responses by emerging players, be they small firms or young firms, which is the way we defined it. Sometimes because they don't have the information, they don't have the sort of legal, administrative capacity. So you sort of have to go get them, diffuse the information, do some capacity building sometimes, and even with that effort, after a few years, we're still not reaching that 50% goal. I mean, we're working towards it, but it proved really hard. And the other part is trying to terminate the projects that are unsuccessful. Again, in principle, in the governance, I mean, we had really wanted to emphasize that. In practice, you quickly run into political economy considerations. So I think there is going to be another session about industrial policy in theory versus in practice. I think our experience is, I think this is better than what we did in the past, but always perfectible. At the European level, very quickly, the challenge is, I mean, it's already been said, this industrial policy is mainly national still. Competition policy is an EU level competence, so there's always going to be some consistency issue. The state aid framework normally defines our capacity to reconcile both. So if it's well defined, it can make sure that the industrial policies are compatible with competition. But it's also, I mean, it's also a delicate balancing act. And then the main tool of European industrial policies is in the important projects of common European interests. But I mean, I think it is an important tool to help Europe try to catch up on technology, but at the same time, it is only partially a European industrial policy because it's still state aid that is granted by member states on projects that are selected by member states. So there needs to be, I think, still more work on a sort of integrated industrial policy vision at the European level. I'm going to be very quick on that because I think I'll run out of time. But I think, I mean, Thomas already talked about competition policy. I think, again here, the idea is it's not incompatible between industrial policy and competition policy, but we need to evolve in the thinking about how competition policy is applied and enforced. On some areas, we need more competition policy, and one area in particular is tackling killer acquisitions, which often fall below the notification thresholds for competition policy, but can be really detrimental to innovation. In other areas, we need to evolve to better account for efficiency gains, especially in innovation, which can be linked to scale effects, but the framework today is very restrictive on that, both in terms of the test itself and on the ability of firms to quantify these gains. And my last point, very, very quickly, is to say, I mean, again, talked more about vertical industrial policies because that's the focus of the day. But of course, there are a number of policies that foster market dynamism that are very complementary to both the innovation, the industrial and competition policies, especially in the realm of pro-market reforms. I mean, that we have done a number of reforms in France in that area to liberalize especially network sectors, and we are also seeing productivity gains from that, which are complementary to what we do with industrial policies. So last point, which I think has already been said as well, is that there are also general policies that are very much complementary to make sure that we continue to foster market dynamism in the realm of simplification, especially, for instance, regulatory sandboxes, which give more agility in regulation. Financing, the reason we don't have enough startups growing is also in the debt bias in the European financing system, flexible labor markets, human capital. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dorothy. Much appreciated. Paolo?
So thank you very much. I'm very happy for being here with you also because my office, the office that I'm directing, it exists also because a technical assistant from OECD to the Italian government. So it's really a pleasure to be in this environment. My contribution will be divided in three parts. First, we were asked to think big. So some ideas about the big policy challenges, then some data on business dynamism in Italy, and then some conclusions, some proposals. So the panel deals with the return of industrial policy in Italy and in industrial policy and what can be done to guarantee that it will be competition neutral, that will be pro-growth, and it won't represent a return to protectionism and to the inefficient state intervention that we saw in the past. The starting point is of course, that industrial policy and competition policy are both fundamental to strengthen dynamism and growth of the market economies, especially in this present historical situation. The interplay among the two, I think, is very much influenced by the historical situation where we are. Of course, there are challenges in this interplay that can be reduced, especially if competition and industrial policies, they descend, or they could descend, as a functional policies from a common economic strategy. So we have a bit to remind the difference between strategy and policy, and imagine that policies coordination is somehow easier when you have a higher level strategy that functionally coordinates or directs the policies, that in this way, this is by design, the coordination works. So sometimes coordination problems are often a result of policies that don't descend from the same strategy, and sometimes are also carried out by different institutional levels. So the European states, coming to Europe, are moving toward a process of strengthening their industrial policies, but the future interplay with market competition and dynamism is unclear. And this because, in my opinion, there are two main problems that make this future a bit uncertain. One is represented by the asymmetries that exists in the EU economic governance architecture, and the other is the transformative momentum of industrial policy. As far as asymmetry, the European Union is a special case in this because we have a strong asymmetry resulting from the exclusive competences on trade and competition of the Union and the residual competences of the member states in their national industrial policies. Of course, in the past decades, the compatibility in this asymmetric structure was mostly assured by the compression of the national industrial policies. And the policy of growth of the Union was mostly dependent and driven by the competition and market policy. This architecture maybe is not anymore, it's not that fit as in the past for the present times, and especially for the return of industrial policy. Inevitably, this return needs the development of a proper industrial European policy. So we have to think in a way how Europe can enter the business of the returning industrial policies, including, when needed, also vertical actions, like in a way are also envisaged in the Draghi report. And of course, this possibility should be coordinated in a single strategy with the expanding member states' industrial policies. We will never get rid of the industrial policies of the member states or their attention to expand. So this is, I think, the problem, the issue of the asymmetry we have to think about. And yes, no, they are not. Sorry. So, a common industrial policy is needed for an issue. There are two main issues. One is an issue of scale, of course. We need the scale of European Union to face some of the problems of industrial growth and competitiveness. But also, in order to avoid that different capacity in financing industrial policy of the member states will damage the common market. So there are two big reasons for this. Member states' industrial policy have to expand, but this expansion has to find limits in both the competition policy of the Union and in the future European industrial policy. By the way, this will also be interesting to see how this is it possible inside the European Union. As far as the transformation, another important point, in my opinion, is the issue that the industrial policy of the future will not look similar to that of the past, because all public policies, especially the economic policies, are in the middle of a transformative revolution, and they are exposed to big transformation driven by epoch-making systemic changes. Future industrial policy will be much different from the past. We can see that they are increasingly invoked not only in response to market failures, but also as a tool to reach strategic goals in the four great strategic transformations: the energy one, the technological one, the demographic, and the geopolitical. Industrial policy is becoming a state, or will become increasingly a state tool, not only when markets fail, but also to sort out our way of these four transformations and to avoid strategic failures in them. So, just to make it a bit shorter, but industrial policies are not only returning, but are also returning transformed and expanding substantially. In the future, a great number of the objectives of the industrial policies may be driven by mentioned transformation that are prevalently non-market processes. We may be at the dawn of a great revolution of industrial policy that will imply a revolution in the measurement, quantification, evaluation, and coordination of industrial policy. Better coordination needs better measurement and better data. And I'm afraid we are not prepared for that. Moving to the issue of dynamism, and now have some slides for this part. Yes. I try to go quickly into one of the main topics of this panel. This is the issue of market dynamism in Italy, measured with the indicator of turnover in exit entry of firms in the economy. Because Italy is a country that traditionally was characterized, and still is characterized, by a below-the-average dynamism. And if we look carefully in the changes in the difference between entry and exit of firms in the economic system in the last 3 years, we see that this indicator has started to improve and to expand significantly for the first time since 2 decades, moving toward levels closer to the EU average. In this picture, we can see that the entry-exit average net change in Italy in the period 21-23 has reached 1.5% plus, compared to almost 0.1, that characterized the period 2008-2020. And you can clearly see how much the post-financial crisis and post-COVID years had a negative impact. This shows that a move toward a much higher dynamism in the Italian business environment has occurred in the last few years. It's not enough, of course. It's only a positive, small sign, but it's a trend, a good trend for the economy. Nevertheless, Italy still shows a firm turnover that is both below the EU average and lower than other important EU economies, like France, for example. So we still need in Italy industrial policies that has an objective to increase the dynamism of the business in Italy. And in order to do this, we need a little bit to plan a pro-dynamic industrial policy. We need to break down this entry-exit rate per sectors and per subsectors a little bit. Here you can see how this changes, what is the difference between services and manufacturing. And we can see how diverse economic sectors contribute very differently to the growth or to the improvement of business dynamism in Italy. Services have shown a positive and high net turnover rate, leading the increased dynamism momentum with a much higher rate of 2% compared to manufacturing. It is interesting to note that for services, high dynamic sectors are those with a lower HHI index, showing a possible correlation between business dynamism and competition. But if we look into manufacturing subsectors, we see also that the situation is different. The highest dynamism is registered in the transport vehicles industry, 1.4 plus. This positive outcome is the result of and this is also considering that automotive is in this sector had a -3 dynamism. So this positive outcomes is the result mostly of the construction activities of ships, planes, and trains. And interesting is also the pharmaceutical, also with an above the average dynamism. Finally, some considerations go to state aid and possible effects on competition, since this is not a very common issue of concern. Italy state aid in percent of GDP is historically significantly far below the EU average, since greater fiscal constraints forces Italy to reduce state aid expenditure. That is the biggest part of Italian industrial policy. But another characteristic of Italian state aid that makes it less distortive, in my opinion, for competition, is that Italy has the highest rate of state aid spent for the objective of direct support to small and medium enterprises. In the last 20 years, the average was 30% of Italian state aid has been destined for this mission, for the mission of SMEs support, direct support, while the European Union average is 5%. In my opinion, these two features of Italian state aid policy, the low share of GDP and the high proportion of SMEs support, may help in reducing the negative impact of industrial policy on competition. I don't have time to go to the instruments, but just to say that there are two main directions in the instruments Italy is using to improve business dynamism. One of the side of scale-up and startups, and the other to technological investment and technological transfer. It's also interesting that we have an annual competition law that helps to regulate the sectors, but also sometimes includes industrial policy instruments, like the startup law is inside the annual competition law. This is, I think, an important example how the two policies can be together, can be united. Leave me a few minutes, only a couple of one for the conclusions. We have a situation that industrial policy is returning with expanded objectives, and a common economic strategy is needed to assure coherence and compatibility. Making industrial policy competition, and it's important, of course, to have the objective to make industrial policy competition neutral, but probably also to have a competition policy more strategic, because this, I think, is a big part of the marriage between the two policies. Industrial policy and competition are less likely to conflict if they lose part of their functional autonomy and they better integrate each other. To do this, it will be important if they could descend from a common economic strategy adopted by the same political level, if possible, or in coordination, in strong coordination by many different levels. In Europe, it is urgent to move toward, this is my provocation, but a European state aid model to fill the vacuum I was referring at the beginning, the asymmetric vacuum of industrial policy resulting from the missing EU capacity and the juridical compressed and financially limited state capacities. They have to expand in parallel and in coordination, avoiding political conflicts and attrition. And this is the new QFP, the discussion for the new financial system of the European Union, is, I think, a big occasion, or could be a big occasion in this direction. The expansion of EU, practically how it could happen into industrial policy, can be done expanding, yes, IPCEI, both in thematic scope, but also including more strategic areas and targeting selected vertical industrial sectors, but also introducing the EU funding together with national and private ones. Finally, we need more tools and integration of data to have a better measurement, quantification, and evaluation of the future industrial policy. That will also help to assess the effects of industrial policy in the different markets. Thank you.
Luke, would you mind? Thank you.
Okay. So thank you, Chair. Thanks to the OECD for the invite to present and to all the organisers of the conference. So I'm just going to take about 10 minutes to just give a bit of background on Irish productivity, business dynamism, the link between the two, and the policies we have in place to try and strengthen that link. So just to start off, I think this has probably been covered by some of the last few presentations, but there's obviously been the productivity global slowdown over the last few decades, particularly since the late 90s, and various explanations put forward to try and explain that. We're yet to fully get to the bottom of it, which is why we're still meeting here 10 years later. But one of the explanations, of course, is the decline in business dynamism over the last since the same period of time. So I'm going to talk a bit about business dynamism. But just to start off, Ireland, for a bit of context, it's a small open economy, as many of you might know. We have a number of highly productive M&Es located in Ireland. A lot of these at our national productivity frontier, and some of which are the global productivity frontier. However, we still have the same policy challenge as a number of other countries in terms of trying to foster domestic SME growth and scaling of these firms. So just start off with productivity. So the chart on the left-hand side there, showing productivity in levels for 2023 with a number of, I think some of the names of countries have dropped off there, but against a number of other similar size economies, as well as the EU average, which is the blue one there, somewhere in the middle. And yeah, we are the top country there. We tend to be top of a lot of charts when it comes to being measured by GDP. And that's due to the distortions associated with a lot of these multinational companies, which don't have a meaningful connection with, when used in GDP, it doesn't really have a meaningful relationship with overall living standards in Ireland. So our National Statistics Office, the CSO, has been grappling with this for the last 10 years or so, trying to come up with alternative measures of GDP and the likes. And one of the handy things they do is spit out a lot of statistics like productivity in terms of the foreign sector and the domestic sector. And our domestic sector is somewhere just in the middle of that chart there. Fortunately, the label fell off there. But when we look at the domestic sector productivity, it's a lot less flatter in there. It's a lot closer to the EU average. And we also have a paper that came out a few months ago, which has taken a chart from on the right-hand side. So if you look at that domestic sector and compare the domestic sectors or subsectors within that, such as wholesale and retail and the likes, against other similar small, open, advanced economies, across these subsectors, our productivity, it tends to be lagging behind these. Which, yeah, that's the blue bar there against the gold bar. So then turn to business dynamism or business churn. On the left-hand side, we just have the firm entry and exit rates over 15 years or so. It didn't include the pandemic period due to the distortions there with firm level supports. But our firm entry rate or birth rate has been, over that period, well below the EU average. I think in 2018-19, it was about half the EU average. And our firm death rate, which isn't quite as bad, is still significantly below the EU average. So then just combining these to get the business churn rate on the right-hand side and comparing to other European countries, as you can see, we're a bit of an outlier there, where our business churn or business dynamism is particularly low compared to EU countries. And this has been picked up in a number of OECD reviews of Ireland over the years, particularly when focusing on productivity and the reasons underlying our fairly weak domestic productivity growth. So then just combining productivity and business dynamism, just have some piece of analysis that got published about a week or two ago. And it's basically looking at productivity of firms who do enter and exit and how they compare to incumbents, not just at the point of entry and exit, but also the years pre and prior to that, or post the entry. So on the left-hand side, just comparing entrants to incumbent or established firms. And these firms who do enter, even though we have a low entry rate, even the firms who do enter tend to be less productive than established firms and take a number of years to catch up, typically at least 5 years, seemingly. Sorry, there are regression coefficients there, controlling for size and sector and all likes. And so yeah, it just emphasised the importance of not just about increasing entry, but also having supports in place to improve the catch-up growth or scaling of these firms who do enter. And then on the right-hand side, just a firm exits, which firms who exit in period T tend to be less productive than incumbents, which appears to be a good thing, supports the idea of market cleansing there. And the fact that there seems to be that decline in the years prior to exit, or sometimes known as the shadow of death in literature. So again, emphasise the importance of having supports in place to support unviable firms or unproductive firms. So that's just some kind of structural context in Ireland. So as mentioned, yeah, we have strong M&E presence, but we still have domestic productivity that seems to be sluggish enough. So one factor, of course, is this weak business dynamism that I mentioned. A couple other factors. Since 2008, we've also had particularly weak investment amongst domestic SMEs in Ireland. And we carry out, because of this, we've been carrying out in the Ministry of Finance firm-level surveys year on year to try and get to the bottom of that. And kind of consistent with session 2 on investment, the same reasons pop up again, where it just seems to be lack of demand really amongst these domestic SMEs. A lot of them citing risk aversion or uncertainty as well as their reasons for not really investing. And as well as that, despite the fact we have such a number of highly productive companies in Ireland, we've, over the last 20, 30 years, number of academic studies, we've always struggled to find any sign of positive spillovers between these, the foreign and domestic firms. I've just cited one of the most recent papers there. I think the only time we really find any spillovers is when we look at firms that invest, domestic firms that invest a certain level of our research and development. So yeah, just turn to the policy piece. I just picked out a couple publications we have this year. Enterprise 2025 Renewed. It's an ambitious 5-year strategy in Ireland that's aimed to support, I think, 1,000 scale-ups over the next 5 years, with particular focus on innovation and try and address them and support spillovers between foreign and domestic firms. And also then with the policy roadmap for SMEs and entrepreneurship, that's really been shaped by a lot of the OECD recommendations that have come out, these country studies reports and the SME reports. And big focus here is having a unified cross-government strategy that aligns all the supports and initiatives across these 30-plus government departments and agencies. And it kind of goes back to what was mentioned in the keynote speech there about the importance of policy coordination. Then just picking out some of the policy supports, I've just put them into 2 different slides. So first of all, policies that support firm entry and reduce barriers to entry. So on the finance side, we've a couple policies that facilitate access to credits and loans. So the Growth and Sustainability Loan Scheme, which provides, I think it's 500 million euros worth of loans to firms that are looking to expand, to export, and the likes. And then we have also Microfinance Ireland, which focuses on micro-sized firms, of course, and this provides government-backed loans up to 50,000 euro. Then we have Enterprise Ireland, which is our state agency responsible for promoting Indigenous firms in Ireland and particularly new firms and help with them with their early stage years. And a couple equity investment schemes there, Pre-Seed Start Fund, High Potential Startup Fund, which are similar to other countries, and then the Seed and Venture Capital Scheme as well, which was recently evaluated and was found to have a benefit cost ratio there of above 4 to 1. And then there's policies there that focus on upskilling or improving the spillovers of the firms that have entered as well. So first of all, you have the skills and training type programs, so Skillnet Ireland, which tries to foster networking and information sharing between the multinational firms and newly established Irish firms. Local enterprise offices, which provide consultancy to newly established firms. And then this National Enterprise Hub, which is kind of the one-stop shop that promotes this coordination of policies across the different government departments. And then on the innovation sports, Digital Transition Fund, which aims to really provide a step change in digital transition for young SMEs, innovation partnerships, Disruptive Technology Innovation Fund, and then the R&D tax credit, which common to a lot of countries have something similar in place. I think in Ireland it's like the 2nd biggest tax expenditure we have, if not the 1st. And I suppose the issue there is always concerned, is this just supporting multinationals that would have been investing in R&D anyway? However, we did have a study recently that did find that at least 60% of the expenditure associated with this tax credit is additional and not just dead weight. So just to wrap up then, so as mentioned at the start, yes, we have particularly low entry-exit rates in Ireland, limiting business dynamism. And of those firms who do enter, they tend to catch up quite slowly, emphasising the importance of these supports in the early stage years. And then on the exit side, it's more important that we don't have policies keeping inefficient firms alive. So we have a policy mix that I've kind of ran through there between supports relating to digitalization and scaling, and it's just important again to evaluate these supports and tax credits on a regular basis, and make sure they're being targeted correctly, given that a lot of the time it's these younger firms that are benefiting disproportionately. And I'll wrap up there. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Very, very wonderful to see. And I'm sure there's quite a few questions from the floor. So we open up to the floor to ask questions. We also will be taking questions from online as well. I can see a gentleman on my right, so therefore on your left. There's 2 gentlemen a few rows down.
Okay, thank you. Giles Wilkes from the Institute for Government, former special advisor who wrestled a lot with this stuff. Can I play the role of Scrooge to this gathering in that there's a lot of great ideas for how we can support companies and help them grow and all that, but dynamism is a double-edged sword. It's meant to involve a lot of market exit as well, and none of our governments can afford any money-based ideas right now. So can I ask each of the panelists what their favorite idea is for making it more easy or regular that small companies exit and go bust, because that's a really important part of economic growth?
Tommaso?
I knew that this question will come. It's difficult because we don't have a lot of evidence. I didn't see where the question came from. Ah, there. Okay, now I can try to look at you. I think that, and this is not really an evidence-based answer, it's more anecdotal evidence. There are programs that help firms to survive the crisis, right? So, and this kind of program should not be the focus now. We have done a study with the JRC looking at COVID aid, and that could have been a policy that goes very wrong. We analyzed data especially for Italy and Spain, and we saw that actually the firms that were accessing subsidies were firms that indeed were a bit healthier before COVID. That is the right thing to do, right? So to have the courage not to support those firms that are failing, essentially. But you're totally right. There is very, very little evidence and very little data on how this process works. So I think that would be another of the areas where we would need better data. I would like to ask also the other panelists, data on entry and exit is always very difficult to get, even from official statistics. So I think that is something I would urge official statistical offices to be very very careful in documenting this kind of patterns.
Yeah, I think on the exit rate, I think at least in France, what we're seeing now in the trends is in a way reassuring that the market process is actually working after the years of COVID. So, I mean, what happened, like in other countries, is because of the support that was providing during the COVID phase, which did not particularly, I mean, did not actually go that much to the very worst performers, in part because, for instance, for guaranteed loans, banks had some skin in the game, so they would not extend the guaranteed loans to the lemons, let's put it that way. But, I mean, still, it wasn't discriminating very much. So we had very, very low bankruptcy rates for a few years. And then since 2023, it's been going up and catching up, actually. So now we have like higher bankruptcy rates than normal, but we're still sort of catching up to the stock that hasn't happened. And when we've looked in the data, the productivity of the firms that are exiting now, it is reassuring in a way because we see that the productivity of the exiters is actually significantly lower than the productivity of the firms that stay. So in a way, this process was delayed, but it is happening. And maybe to the other part of your question about governments not being able to afford support, I think there too, I think we need to think about industrial policy not just as subsidies, but there are actually a lot of much less costly tools that we can use depending on what is a market failure. I mean, if it's a lack of financing but not a lack of profitability of the project, then you can use loans, you can use equity stakes, you don't need to subsidize. If it's a lack of profitability because the project is very risky, that's the case of a number of decarbonation projects, for instance, then there are some tools to de-risk through guarantees or, you know, but which are not necessarily subsidies. And subsidies should really, in an ideal world, be limited to the cases where you have insufficient private profitability and very strong socioeconomic externalities. That's actually a pretty high bar to pass. So I think we also need to think a bit harder about the range of financing tools that we can use and not automatically go to subsidies.
Thank you. I don't have an answer because somehow it's also a very political decision. Well, of course, there are several instruments that I think in my country make the state supporting companies that are non-profitable and they should exit the market. And I think also to the labor system and the labor law, the crisis law. So there is a big, several interplaying instruments that are responsible for this. I don't have any recipe how we can reduce this. Sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I think I'd agree, Dorothy, that yeah, it's at least promising that a lot of firms we are seeing exiting at least tend to be less productive, and not just less productive, they are declining in the years previous. Also then to echo Tomas's point as well about the lack of data. We used to use the business register, but a lot of the time that data comes with a huge lag, so it's hard to really, even looking at the COVID period, it'd be interesting to see how them exit rates change as well once that data is available. And even when we get that, it'd be great to see if there was something there as well on reasons for firm exiting. Like it's difficult to detect when a firm is actually exiting because it's unviable versus whether it's just a merger or an acquisition. So yeah, ideally more data, but might leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. So it would seem as though there is a clear idea of who to support, but not a clear idea of who not to support, it would seem. It's another question.
Yeah, Dan Andrews, OECD Economics Department. Tommaso, my question's to you. Terrific presentation. If I understood correctly, one of your points was that if Europe had more traditional ex-post enforcement activity, we would have had more dynamism and more investment. That was essentially one of your points, I think. What about in terms of ex-ante regulation in sort of emerging spaces like digital and data? Like, what's your read of the evidence on that? And there's currently an experiment underway in Europe in terms of ex-ante regulation, and what are the potential effects there on market dynamism?
Thank you. This so it's a very interesting and difficult question. So there is a lot of heterogeneity in regulations. So it was mentioned, actually, there are many regulations that are deleterious for competition. They are protecting firms, they are erecting entry barriers. And there is this project at the OECD, you know it better than me probably, looking at how we can reduce these and providing compelling evidence that actually reducing these regulatory barriers can increase productivity. The new kind of regulatory tools that Europe imposed itself in the past 2 years, I think you mentioned DMA and DSAs, or you think about DMA as DSAs, is a reaction to the fact that we realize that competition policy, especially in the digital sphere, is not working. Last week, DG Comp closed an abuse case against Google after 5 years with a fine of almost 3 billion, but not imposing any remedy and giving Google again 60 days to come up with a solution to that problem that was a well-established abuse of dominance. Now, that is I think, a signal that it has not been working, and we have to find some new tools. Now, it's true that imposing new regulations sometimes can be a barrier to some firm to innovate. That was a discussion about the GDPR, especially for small firms. It becomes more costly to comply. So one has to keep the balance, but I still think that the introduction of these regulatory tools in that areas was necessary, because we saw that the tools that we have didn't keep the market contestable. And that is an issue, because if the market is not contestable, you can have a lot of efficiency gains and productivity gains, but these might not be passed on to the consumers. That was something that Diane was mentioning today. So many consumers don't have the feeling that they profit from this kind of innovation. So in that sense, I think that we should look where it works, and there is a connection to evaluation. We need to evaluate this very carefully, and if it doesn't work, we have to stop that. Therefore, the idea of sunset clauses to impose to politicians a deadline, impose some obligation to provide evidence that works, and if it doesn't work, then we move on.
Thank you. We've got a couple of trending questions online, but let me take two more from the floor, and then we go to online. I think there's a gentleman here on the right, and there's a lady further down the middle.
Salvatore Zecchini. I might sound an iconoclast, but I still have to say it. It's not clear to me whether the relationship between competition and investment innovation is a linear one or a quadratic one. The report by the EU Commission on competitiveness talked about excessive competition preventing the development of enterprises able to compete on a European or global scale. The example was referred to telecommunications. In the United States, there are 3 main telecommunications. In Europe, more than 9. So if there is a quadratic relationship, then we have 2 questions. First, what is the relevant market on which we have to base our judgment? And second, how do we reach the optimum point in this non-linear relationship, whereby in the initial stages, more competition leads to more investment, more innovation, but beyond a certain level, you have the opposite. Thank you.
Thomas, I think that may be for you, and others as well.
I mean, I don't want to monopolize, but so on telecom, I have a very clear view. And I expressed this view together with Tommaso Valletti, Massimo Motta, and Martin Peitz. I think that the Draghi report was very wrong on telecom. First of all, the evidence provided about the lack of investment in European telecommunication is not well grounded. So we have a lot of heterogeneity in Europe, but in many countries we don't have a lack of investment compared to the US. Now, what you are saying that in the Draghi report says we have too many firms in Europe, so we should consolidate. I think it's the wrong approach. So if we think that we want to consolidate, we can consolidate now. There is no antitrust authority that would be against a cross-border merger. If Telecom Italia would buy the 4th player in Germany, that would not be a problem. What Big Telecom was asking is to consolidate within national border. Now, the market definition is not something that we can decide politically. To some extent, we could decide it politically if we would reach a common market in telecommunication, but that is not the case. Frequencies are allocated at the national basis. Users cannot simply buy their contract in any European country and use it in other countries. To some extent they can, because there is a roaming regulation that impose some caps on the prices. So I would say first we can have consolidation already now with cross-border merger, and if we want to have a really big consolidation in European telecom markets, the first thing that we have to do is to create the condition for this consolidation. That would be to have a common European telecommunication market like in the US. There is one market and firms are competing for the customer in the entire country. That is not what is happening in Europe. And in general, sure, the relationship between competition and investment doesn't need to be linear. It depends on the sector, and there are sectors with huge economies of scales where maybe it's we could have too much competition.
Thank you. I'm going to take chair's privilege for 1 second just to reflect on some of the questions that have come from online, more directly at more of the examples that we're seeing across our 3 nations. Stephen Smith has asked to all, especially to Luke and Paolo, but to others as well, if the priority is to support entry of new firms, especially SMEs, how do your respective governments propose to ensure labour market stability and to minimise unemployment?
Okay, thank you. So, if I understood, the question is about the issue that the workers that are exiting from the exit companies are not the same of the entering companies. And so this dynamism will produce unemployment and will destabilize the labor market. Yes, of course, these are two considerations. One, the main issue here is played by the education training system. This is the vocational structures, the offices for the reskilling of population of workforce. So this is something that cannot be directly taken by the industrial policy. The industrial policy has to favor the new companies are created, and the problem of the exiting employers has to be solved by the educational system. But I have to say that, or through the reskilling system, may be favored also by the state, but not specifically as an industrial policy. But I don't see this as a strong evidence in Italy, actually. We have basically an opposite problem because of the demography. So we don't have this dramatic urgence. Actually, we have the opposite, the fact that the companies cannot find the workers, and that in the next years it's supposed to be millions of jobs that will not be substituted by other workers. So we have actually to do the opposite, to help the companies to find the right skilled people. And this technology and IA, I think, will play a big role.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with, yeah, I think that was a lot of it was covered there in terms of it goes back to importance of policies, looking at reskilling, education to minimise the unemployment following it. But also, I suppose it's, you could also say that entry of SMEs usually has a disproportionate impact on job growth as well and employment growth. So, yeah, there's a bit of balance there.
Frank, a quick question for Dorothy. Specifically looking at your 50% target for emerging players in France, actually 2030 sort of ambition. Where's been your actual experience? And you're nearly halfway now. Are you on target to reach your goals?
No, as I mentioned very, very quickly in my remarks, I mean, I think this has been a constant effort since we launched the plan. Because it's not enough to set a target and say, well, you know, 50% of the credits will be allocated to small and young firms, but they don't, spontaneously they don't come. And I think it's also showing a bit of attention that we always have in the design of the industrial policy tools. I mean, you want a competitive process. A competitive process means you ask for projects to be submitted, so you concretely ask for a lot of paperwork. And if it's not simple, then the young and the small firms have a harder time coming versus, you know, the very simple policies like R&D tax credits, which will benefit the small firms because they're just easy. You ask for it, you know, we'll get it. So I mean, you have to, I mean, in the early stages, we didn't get a lot of submissions from emerging players. There has been a lot of work from the Directorate Generate for Enterprises, which is in charge of sort of the implementation of the plan, to try to have more diffusion of the information about what was available in terms of well, the priority sectors, trying to look for which are the emerging players in that sector, trying to reach out to them, seeing if they needed training, etc. And even with that, we were about 40%, which is already, I think not that bad, but it takes a lot of effort. And then, yeah, you kind of, first you want to put out the competitive processes and say, well, the best ones will come. The truth is the bigger ones will come. And then you have to think, well, which are, and you have to go find the small firms or the young firms, which means, again, you have to sort of go and not pick the firms because there are several, but still go and look for which are the promising players in that field. But I think this tension between competitiveness and complexity you will always have in this kind of tools.
Thank you, much appreciated. I think we've been timed out now. I just want to thank the panel, and especially Mr. Thomas for setting the scene and all of the country representations as well. But thank you. We put our hands together.
I've got a mic, thank you. All right, thank you so much, everyone. We now have a 30-minute coffee break. As usual, coffee's in the next room. Please feel free to move around. If you are wondering why we are blinding our panel with bright lights, it's so that the people online can actually see them. And obviously, it's hugely important that we can maximize their engagement. And actually, we've had brilliant take-up. We had 165 people dialing in this morning. So if you are watching online, thank you. If you are submitting questions online, thank you very much. And yes, see you in half an hour, please, for an all-important session on implementation.